Dumb Husky and his white cat Shizun. Chapter 55. This venerable one feels uneasy. Zuk may be called the land of immortals, but its residents are in fact, not immortals but rather a people of mixed blood, half immortal and half demon mixed blood. In the cultivation world, they are the beings that are most similar to immortals. They are also known as the feathered tribe. The feathered tribe has always lived in Peach Blossom Spring beyond the maze of Juhua Mountain. They rarely ever interfere in matters of the human world. But since half of the blood that flowed in their bodies was still mortal after all, they weren't completely detached. Thus, they would often appear at times of turmoil or disaster in the cultivation world and use their immense powers to help the mortals through the crisis. When Moran was raising hell and turning the world upside down in the last lifetime, the feathered tribe had appeared in droves. But their power couldn't best the emperor who had already perfected the forbidden technique. In the end, Moran had chased down and killed every single one of them, treading across the ground covered in blood and scorched feathers. Zuk, the land of the immortals, was burned down in a single day. It was an extremely frantic memory, so much so that even Moran would break out in cold sweat whenever he recalled it afterwards. He thought that he was like a man possessed at that time, endlessly cruel. But right now, he clearly did not yet have the strength to contend with the feathered tribe. In fact, due to the natural superiority of their blood, the vast majority of cultivators fell short of them in terms of spiritual strength. Out of the entire Shizun peak, only a few of the most distinguished elders could even exchange blows with them. Xuemeng unintentionally saw Moran's face and got quite the scare. "What's up with you? Why is your face so pale?" "It's nothing." Moran lowered his eyelashes and whispered, "I just ran too fast earlier." The arrival of the feathered tribe marked the beginning of Shimei's tragedy in the last lifetime. Moran's heart jumped to his throat. He thought it would be a while yet before these events happened. Why had the progression of so many things changed so much from before? The faint winter sun hung weakly in the sky, illuminating the world in a layer of deathly white. Standing underneath it, Moran couldn't help reaching out and taking Shimei's hand. Shimei blinked. "What's wrong?" Moran shook his head and said nothing. Just then, Xue Zhenyang started speaking. His words weren't much different from what he said in the last life. "The reason I called everyone here today is because envoys of the feathered tribe have come once again. Just like 80 years ago, they came from the Peach Blossom Spring to the human world to help in a foretold calamity." A pause as he looked slowly over the disciples gathered below. As everyone knows, the barrier to the ghost realm was originally set by the heavenly emperor Fuxi, but it has gradually weakened over these past million years, and would break every few decades. In recent years, its power fades by the day, and despite everyone's utmost efforts. Xuemeng huffed under his breath. "Father is talking some nonsense. It's clearly the efforts of basically just Shizun. Despite everyone's utmost efforts, the breach grows bigger still, and the barrier will eventually break down like it did decades ago. When that time comes, the boundary between the human realm and the ghost realm will be broken, thousands of ghosts and spirits will rush out, and ordinary people will suffer. In order to avert this calamity, envoys of the feathered tribe have come to the sects to select those with the most suitable spiritual energy and innate skill to go to the Peach Blossom Spring to cultivate in seclusion." His words caused a commotion in the crowd. The feathered tribe is picking people to go advance their cultivation at the Peach Blossom Spring in the land of the immortals. All of the disciples grew from amazed to excited, and, regardless of actual ability, each secretly held hopes and expectations. Only Moran alone was not the least bit glad, his features subtly showing anxiety instead. He was usually very good at feigning appearances, so much so that others couldn't even tell the real from fake, but right now, he couldn't hide his feelings at all. This had to do with Shimei's survival. Back then, Shimei was selected by the feathered tribe and went to the Peach Blossom Spring to cultivate. Not long after his return, the breach underwent a large-scale breakdown, and huge hordes of ghosts climbed up from hell. Shimei fought alongside Chu Wanning in the ensuing battle, each taking one side of the array, working together to repair the biggest breach. However, Shimei wasn't as strong as Chu Wanning and the countless ghosts. Seeing that the mortal realm was about to be closed off, all charged toward Shimei in a murderous stream as he was focusing on maintaining the balance in the barrier, and ran him through in an instant. The demonic energy pierced through his heart and soul. Chu Wanning didn't even lift a single finger to help, didn't even attempt to stop them. As Shimei fell from atop the coiled dragon pillar, he chose instead to use all of the remainder of his power to seal off the rest of the barrier that Shimei wasn't able to. It was snowing that day. Shimei's falling form seemed as if it was just another one of the countless small, insignificant flakes of snow. The snow fell non-stop, covering the sky. No one would care if a flake of the frozen crystal was about to melt, just like generation after generation of people, the decades of their lives from time they were born until they die. None would care about an ordinary person's death except their family and close relatives. In that snow, in that pandemonium, Moran held Shimei as his breathing grew shallower and shallower, kneeling on the ground begging Chu Wanning to please spare him a glance, to please save him. But in the end Chu Wanning only turned away, chose to walk away into the boundless white, to accomplish his own prestige, severing the bonds between master and disciple. How laughable! The things Chu Wanning liked, the things he cared about, the things he pursued, all of it was so very laughable. For example, Chu Wanning liked the sound of rain in the lotus pond, and he liked the melancholic verses of the poet Du, with that frighteningly strict adherence to form. For example, Chu Wanning cared about the sprouting of plants in the coming of spring, the death of cicadas with the arrival of autumn. He cared about where the flames of war were lit once again, and where the common people struggled. For example, Chu Wanning had always taught them to be righteous, to put the people before thyself. But Moran thought, fuck the people. He didn't know or care about those people. What did it matter to him whether they live or die? If Chu Wanning's rain poured over the mutterings of lost souls, if his plants were splashed with the tears of refugees, Moran didn't care. His rain was normal rain, and his plants were ordinary plants. The common people were just so many words on a piece of paper. Who the hell cares? And so he thought, Chu Wanning was despicable, a hypocrite who spouted words of duty and compassion as if his heart was big enough to hold everything under the sky, but in reality, that pathetically narrow chest of his didn't even have a place for his own disciple. Afterwards, he had angrily asked Chu Wanning, does your heart ache? Do you feel any unease at all? You said to put the people before thyself, but you're still alive while Shimei is dead following your commands. You're the one who got him killed, you hypocrite, you liar. Do you even have a heart? When Shimei fell from the platform, he was calling for you, he was calling Shizun. Did you hear him? Did you hear him? Why didn't you save him? Why didn't you save him? Chu Wanning, you have stone for a heart. You've never cared about us. You didn't care. You didn't care. And then, everything ended up the way they did. Chu Wanning became adored and respected by everyone in the cultivation world, practically a king just without the crown, and no one spared a thought for those who had perished. Shimei's death was like an unremarkable step under the feet of the victorious. He traded an ungifted disciple for peace and prosperity, the so-called world peace. No one would say he was wrong in that. Only Moran saw that the brilliant crown atop his head was made of the bones of the dead, that his success was built on Shimei's death. He hated to the bottom of his heart. Hey, young man. Hey. There was a warm hand on his forehead all of a sudden. Moran was startled and opened his eyes as he was ripped from his pitch-black memories. Before him was a delicate face, bright and lovely. One of the envoys of the feathered tribe had approached without him knowing, and was smiling gently at him. Spacing out while such a great opportunity is right in front of you. Ah, big sister, please don't mind. Moran did his best to cheer up so as to not rouse any suspicion. Smiling back at the envoy he said, "I've always liked to daydream, and was so hoping to be selected that I got lost in my imaginations of what the peach blossom spring might look like. So sorry about that." It turned out that, while Moran was lost in his memories, the envoys of the feathered tribe had already come down and began picking people. However, he was so caught up in his tangled thoughts that he was wholly unaware of things happening around him. The envoy smiled sweetly, and then said something that Moran hadn't been expecting at all: "Your spiritual energy is pure, and your cultivation and aptitude are both remarkable as well. If you want to go to the peach blossom spring, come along then." Moran. To the peach blossom spring? Only Shimei and Chu Wanning were chosen in the last lifetime. Why in this life? He was too shocked to even speak. Luckily, being chosen by the feathered tribe is naturally something worthy of shock and amazement, so the people nearby didn't find his reaction odd at all, only gazing at him with envy. The envoy brought him to Loyalty Hall, and as the initial shock subsided and his heart stopped hammering in his chest, his eyes began to fill with an ecstasy that no one else saw. Things were indeed different this time around. Even though he didn't yet know if these changes were for better or for worse, and why exactly the events had even changed at all, at least he could go to the peach blossom spring too. If he studies under the feathered tribe as well, then the heavy task of repairing the barrier might not fall on Shimei when the time comes. He wasn't some cultured man. Even after living 2 lives, he still didn't understand what putting the people before the self even meant. But Shimei was the person who was the kindest to him in this world, and before him, nothing else mattered. Including his own meat sack and this half a wisp of returned soul. As long as Shimei lives, he would throw it all away. But when the envoys had finished their selection and gathered them all in front of Loyalty Hall, Moran found that the lineup was completely different from the last life. Shimei was included as before, but as a result of being in seclusion, Chu Wanning missed the selection, so he wasn't amongst the chosen. In his place was Suanji Elder's disciple Xiaosini. And even more surprising was the fact that Xuemeng had also been invited to the peach blossom spring. As per the words of the envoy, there is a lingering power of the exalted Gushan's sacred sword on your person. How interesting. From the sky-reaching pagoda nearby came the deep sound of a clock reverberating throughout Shizun Peak. From Shizun Peak of the lower cultivation realm, the chosen are Shueziming, Mo Weiyu, Shi Mingjing, and Xiaosini, for a total of 4. The head of the envoys conveyed to Xue Zhenyang before releasing a messenger mina bird. Lifting her hand with the vividly colored bird perched atop a fingertip, she continued in a clear voice, "These 4 are exceptionally talented individuals, suitable in aptitude and genuine in character." Thus concludes this report. With that, she released the bird. The mina memorized her words and with a flutter of its powerful wings, quickly vanished into the vast skies. To be able to go cultivate at the peach blossom spring was a rare opportunity, even more so than acquiring a holy weapon, and no one would turn it down. Moreover, they would be studying techniques to ward against the breakdown of the barrier to the ghost realm, the very duty and obligation of those who cultivate, and no one could turn it down. As for how long it will take, it could be anywhere from a couple of months to 3 or even 5 years. But the feathered tribe was not unreasonable. Seeing that it was nearly the end of the year, they said to stay and spend New Year's Eve first, then they will come bring the group to the peach blossom spring at Juhua Mountain. Thinking about how he will soon be able to go together with Shimei to the peach blossom spring, Moran couldn't help feeling overjoyed. However, it was not long before the joy faded away. He didn't understand why at first, until one day, passing by the foot of the southern peak of Shizun Peak, he looked up to see the sealed-off Red Lotus Pavilion. Moran's steps slowed subconsciously, then came to a stop altogether. He stood there, gazing up where the mountain disappeared into the clouds. Chu Wanning had been in seclusion for over 3 months. In this life, the hatred he held toward this person seemed to be ebbing away. Even if he reminded himself time and again to not forget the look on Chu Wanning's face when he abandoned him and Shimei, there were still times when he empathized with him, when he felt confused and disconcerted. Xiaosini was walking with him. Seeing the odd expression on Moran's face and the way he stared at the southern peak lost in thought, his heart skipped a beat and he asked, "What is it? Little Shidi, do you think he will come out before we leave?" Ah. Moran paused, coming back to his senses and smiled toward Chu Wanning. Having spent quite some time together, he felt that this little Shidi was clever and sensible, and liked him a lot. "I was talking about my Shizun, Yuhang elder." Chu Wanning, "I see." Moran sighed, muttering, "He's never been in seclusion for this long before. Could it be that the injury he got at Jinchinj Lake was actually very serious?" This was the first time in a long while that he brought up his Shizun of his own accord. Chu Wanning already knew that it was impossible, but still couldn't help asking, "Do you miss him?" End chapter. Dumb Husky and his white cat Shizun. Chapter 56. This venerable one is busy wrapping dumplings. To be asked such a question, Moran's face was one of bewilderment. Do I miss him? In spite of the deep, unforgettable resentment from his previous life, Chu Wanning had never wronged him in this one. Instead, he had shielded him over and over again from danger, and he was the one who was covered head to toe in injuries and bruised black and blue for him instead. After a long time, he finally responded, "And, all of these times that he's been injured, it was all because of me." Seeing the expression on his face, Chu Wanning felt a twinge of warmth in his heart. He wanted to say something back to Moran, but stopped after hearing what he said next. "He's done too much for me, and I can only hope to help him recover a little bit quicker. I don't want to owe him too much." That flicker of warmth his heart seems to have died as it solidified into ice. Chu Wanning stood still for a little while, feeling as though he was extremely laughable. Moran already told him that the only thing between them was the relationship of master and disciple. It was his own fault that his head became dizzy with excitement at the slightest bit of hope, flying like a moth into a blazing fire and being scorched into ashes. He couldn't blame anyone else. Chu Wanning smiled. It was probably an ugly and dejected smile. "You're overthinking it. You are his disciple, so there's no such thing as owing him debts. Everything he does willingly." Moran's eyes turned to him, "And you're still so small, but you're always turning your nose up, being cheeky and imitating how adults speak," he said, laughing brightly, and rubbed Xiaosini's head. Chu Wanning's head was patted for a while. He was still laughing at first, but after a while, his eyes slowly started to fill up with tears, and, facing the dazzlingly brilliant face in front of him, he said softly, "Moran, I don't want to play with you anymore, let go." Moran's skull was several inches too thick, so he didn't notice any changes in his Shidi's expression. Besides that, he had gotten so used to joking around and yelling with Xiaosini that he didn't hesitate to pinch the child's soft, baby-smooth cheeks. Moran's lips quirked up softly. And he made a funny face. Why is little Shidi mad this time? Chu Wanning stared at the child reflected in the other's eyes, with such an ugly smile on his pinched face, like a pathetic, funny-looking monster. "Let go." Moran didn't notice, and continued teasing him just as he did before. Okay, don't be mad, I won't say that you're pretending to be an adult, Come here, let's make up, call me Shiji. Let go of me. Be good, call me Shiji, and I'll buy you Osman thus cake to eat in a bit. Chu Wanning closed his eyes, eyelashes trembling slightly, and finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "Moran, I'm not kidding around, I really don't want to play with you anymore. Can you let go of me, let go, okay?" His slender eyebrows knitted together, and tears didn't trickle out from his eyes because they were tightly shut. However, he spoke in a voice choked with sobs, "Moran. It hurts. It hurt too much to hold one person in his heart, so he hid him carefully in the very depths of his heart. It was fine if that person didn't like him, as long as he could think about that person quietly, protect that person silently. It was fine if he couldn't have that person, all of it was fine. But that person's warmth and tenderness were given only to others, and the only things offered to him were barbs and thorns. He held him in his heart, and whenever that person moved, his heart would start bleeding. Day after day, new wounds would appear before the old ones had even healed over. It was then that Chu Wanning knew that even if he wasn't vying to obtain this person's affections, every single moment that he held him in his heart would hurt him to his core. He didn't know how long he'd be able to bear this kind of pain, didn't know when he'd break down from it completely. Mo Ran finally noticed that something was off, and frantically let go. He touched the other's red-tinged cheeks, at a complete loss as to what to do. Chu Wanning suddenly thought that being in the body of a child wasn't a bad thing. At least, this way, he could say so if it hurt without restraint, could show a little bit of his vulnerable side. At least, this way, he would look toward him with concern. This was something that he would have never even dared to think about before. In the blink of an eye, it was already New Year's Eve. This was the liveliest time of year on Shisheng Peak. All of the disciples were busy putting up red paper talismans and sweeping snowdrifts. The head chef at Menpo Hall was busy from dawn till dusk, preparing delicacies for the end-of-year feast. Also, all of the elders prepared spells and charms that they specialized in to add to the festivities to help welcome the new year. For example, Tanlang Elder transformed a pool of fresh spring water into fragrant wine, and Suanji Elder released the 3,000 fire light mice that he'd been raising, allowing them to scatter around the sect and to keep watch wherever they were, bringing everyone a little bit of warmth and respite from the cold. Lucan Elder enchanted the snowmen everyone made to run around the peak and yell Happy New Year at anyone they ran into. No one had expected Yuheng Elder to do anything. As a matter of fact, he was still in seclusion. He'd been gone for a long time and hadn't appeared in front of anybody since the festivities started. Xuemeng stood by the window, his face tilted upwards, looking at the petals of haitang blossoms fluttering from the skies, and spoke as though preoccupied with something. We'll be gone after today. It seems we won't be able to see him before we leave after all. I wonder what Shizun's doing right now. He's definitely cultivating. Mo Ran said through a mouthful of apple. Speaking of which, all of the elders are supposed to put on a performance tonight. It sucks that Shizun isn't here. If he was, he'd have to perform too. I wonder what he could even do. Mo Ran laughed before continuing, maybe he'd put on a display of how to get angry at. Xuemeng glared at him. How about a performance of whipping Mo Weiyo to death? It was the new year, so Mo Ran didn't get angry at Xuemeng's harsh joke. He suddenly thought of something and asked, oh yeah, have you seen the little Shidi today? You mean Xiaosini? Xuemeng replied, I haven't seen him, but in any case, he's Suanji Elder's disciple. Suanji is already being gracious to not mind him hanging out with us every day, but if he kept sticking around us even during the New Year festivities, his Shizun might really lose his mind. Mo Ran laughed, I guess. The rays of the setting sun turned into evening above Red Lotus Pavilion. Chu Wanning held a pill in his hand, looking it over carefully. Xue Zhenyang was sitting across from him and pouring himself a cup of tea, since Chu Wanning didn't invite him to have some. He also ate a crispy pastry from the plate. Etiquette be damned. Chu Wanning glared at him, but Xue Zhenyang kept chewing obliviously. Yuheng, aren't you done looking at it yet? Tanlang can be pretty harsh with his words, but his intentions aren't bad at all. It's not like he'd actually harm you. What are you saying, sect leader? Chu Wanning replied lightly. I was just thinking that since Tanlang Elder already went through the trouble to concoct a pill that would allow me to regain my adult form for one day, then why doesn't he just extract a couple more of them? That way, I can just take one when the need arises. Aya, If only it was that easy, Xue Zhenyang said. The raw materials that go into making this medicine are rare beyond measure, and Tanlang's already out of materials after refining 3 of them. It's not a long-term plan. I see. Chu Wanning replied, deep in thought. So, that's how it is, please give him my thanks. Haha. Xue Zhenyang waved his hand. You two are actually pretty similar, you know, curt with your words but not bad at heart. Chu Wanning shot a glare over at him, but didn't say anything. He poured himself a cup of tea, and swallowed the medicine that would allow him to return to his original form. Xue Zhenyang was just about to eat another pastry when Chu Wanning stopped his hand. What? The sect leader said unhappily. Chu Wanning spoke, that's mine. Xue Zhenyang. When night fell on Shizun Peak, all of the disciples filtered into Menpo Hall, one after the other. Each elder brought their disciples and sat down together to knead dough and make dumplings. Both the snowmen and the firelight mice threaded through the throngs of people, passing them jars of salt, red pepper powder, saucers of chopped scallions and other miscellaneous things. Every table was bustling with excitement and chattering laughter. Yuhang Elder's table was the only exception. The disciples were all here, but the master was absent. Xuemeng looked around him for a bit, sighing, I miss Shizun. Shimei replied warmly, didn't Shizun send us a letter a few days ago, telling us to enjoy the festivities and to work hard on our cultivation at the Peach Blossom Springs, and that he'll come see us as soon as he comes out of seclusion? He did say that, but just when will he come out of seclusion? Xuemeng sighed sorrowfully, his eyes wandering listlessly past the gates, when he suddenly sat up straight, eyes opened wide like a cat and staring out the gates. Xuemeng's face paled and then colored, flushed a dizzying shade of red as his eyes shone brightly. He was so excited that he couldn't even speak properly. That's. Mo Ran thought that one of the rare spiritual beasts that Suanji Elder raised had escaped to liven things up a bit, and thought that Xuemeng was surprised because he was inexperienced and overreacting. He laughed, that's what, look at you, it's like you saw an immortal or something, what's there to be so sir? He turned around, still grinning gleefully, and casually looked up. And couldn't finish the rest of his sentence. Standing in the snowy dusk outside the door was Chu Wanning, dressed in white robes with a vividly red cape. He turned elegantly to the side to put away his umbrella and shake off the dusting of snow, then his eyelashes flicked up to reveal a pair of bright, slender phoenix eyes underneath, a mild glance sweeping over them. With just this one glance, by the time Mo Ran came back to his senses, his heart was already beating fast and his palms were covered in sweat, and even his breathing had slowed down involuntarily. The chatter in Menpo Hall gradually quieted down. Usually, whenever Chu Wanning appeared in Menpo Hall, the disciples didn't dare to cause a ruckus. Even more so now, to suddenly appear on New Year's Eve after having been in seclusion for such a long time. The snowflakes on him seemed to make his face even fairer and more beautiful, making his eyebrows seem darker and more defined. Mo Ran stood up, murmuring, Shizun. Xuemeng bounded up and sprinted with kitten-like excitement towards Chu Wanning, yelling Shizun, while running into Chu Wanning's arms. Chu Wanning's clothes were thoroughly chilled from the bitter cold outside, but Xuemeng wore an expression like he was holding peach blossoms from early spring, or a coal fire from late summer, endlessly warm. Xuemeng began to shout noisily, not stopping to take a breath. Shizun, you've finally come out? I thought that we wouldn't be able to see you before leaving, but you love us after all. Shizun. Shimei also came over and bowed respectfully, his face beaming with delight. Congratulations to Shizun for coming out of seclusion. Chu Wanning patted Xuemeng's head and nodded in Shimei's direction. This master has arrived slightly late, but let's go greet the new year together. He sat down at the feast, with Xuemeng at his side and Mo Ran across from him. With Chu Wanning's arrival, and after the initial hubbub and excitement died down, the 3 disciples fell into their usual habits, sitting upright and still like their Shizun. Their table was weirdly silent. There was flour, ground meat, eggs, and many other types of ingredients on the table, along with a brand new copper coin. Moran was the one with the best cooking skills in their group. Thus, everyone decided that he'd be the one to give instructions. "Well, I guess I'll take charge, then," Moran replied, laughing. "Do any of you know how to roll dough?" Nobody uttered a word. "All right, I'll roll out the wrappers then," Moran said. "Shimei, you make the best wontons and dumpling filling isn't all that different, so why don't you make the filling?" Shimei hesitated for a while before saying, There's some difference after all. I'm afraid that I might not be able to do it properly." Chu Wanning replied lightly, "It's fine as long as it's edible, don't worry too much." Shimei smiled, "All right then. Xuemeng, you can just pass the water or help roll our sleeves up or something. Just don't get in the way." Xuemeng. As for Shizun, Moran grinned. Would Shizun like to sit by the side and have a nice cup of tea? Chu Wanning replied coldly, "I'll wrap the dumplings." "Ah!" Moran exclaimed, startled, thinking that he might have gone violently deaf in both ears. "What did you want to do?" "I said, I'll wrap the dumplings." Moran suddenly thought that he would have much rather gone violently deaf in both ears after all. End chapter. Dumb Husky and his white cat Shizun. Chapter 57. This venerable one will listen to you. Play the gukkan once again. Unexpectedly, although Chu Wanning's dumpling wrapping technique was clumsy, the finished product actually wasn't bad. The dumplings made by those long fingers of his were adorably round, lining up neatly on the table. All three disciples were dumbstruck. Shizun actually knows how to make dumplings. Am I dreaming right now? He's really good at it, too. Wow. Of course their hushed mutterings didn't escape Chu Wanning's ears. Chu Wanning pressed his lips together, eyelashes fluttering imperceptibly, and even though he was expressionless as always, the tips of his ears grew a little bit pink. Xuemeng couldn't resist asking, "Shizun, is this your first time making dumplings?" "MN. Then how are you making them so nice looking?" "It's not so different from making golems, just folding a few creases, there's nothing to it." Moran watched him from across the wooden table, gradually becoming lost in thought. The only time he had ever seen Chu Wanning cook in the last life was after Shimei's passing. That day, he had gone to the kitchen and slowly made the wontons that were Shimei's specialty. But before they could make it into the pot, they were struck to the ground by a Moran who had lost all sense, the snowy white wontons rolling all over the floor. Moran had no recollection at all of whether those wontons were round or flat, well made or deformed. The only thing he remembered was the look on Chu Wanning's face, the way he had stared at him without a word, with bits of flour still on his face, looking strangely unfamiliar, somewhat at a loss, even a bit dumb. Moran had thought that he would get angry, but Chu Wanning had said nothing in the end, only bending over and, with his head lowered, quietly picked up the dirty wontons one by one, gathered them together and then tossed them into the trash. Just what was going through Chu Wanning's mind at that time? Moran didn't know. He had never thought about it, didn't want to think about it, and truthfully, didn't dare think about it. The dumplings were all done being wrapped and the little snowmen carried them away to the kitchen to be boiled. In accordance with tradition, Chu Wanning put a copper coin into one of them. Whoever gets it would have good luck. It wasn't long before the snowmen brought back cooked dumplings, complete with spicy and sour dipping sauce in the wooden tray. Xuemeng said, "Shizun, please go ahead first." Chu Wanning did not decline. He picked up a dumpling with his chopsticks and put it in his bowl, but did not eat it, instead picking up 3 more and giving them to Xuemeng, Moran and Shimei. "Happy New Year," Chu Wanning said mildly. The disciples were taken aback for a moment before they all broke into smiles. "Shizun, Happy New Year. As it happens, Mo Ran bit into the copper coin with a crack on the very first dumpling. He was caught totally off guard, and nearly broke a tooth on it. Looking at the grimace on his face, Shi Mei laughed. A Ran is sure to have good luck this year. Shwemang, tch, lucky bastard. Mo Ran, teary-eyed, Thithun, aren't you a little too good af pickig dumplingth, I goff it on the fairy firth one. Chu Wanning, speak properly. Mo Ran, I pith my tongue. Chu Wanning. Mo Ran rubbed his cheek and took a sip of the tea Shi Mei offered before the pain finally subsided a little, and he immediately began joking around. Haha, could it be that Shizun memorized which dumpling had the copper coin and deliberately gave it to me? You wish. Chu Wanning said coldly, then lowered his head and started eating. Mo Ran wasn't sure if he was seeing things, but under the warm candlelight, Chu Wanning's face seemed a little red. After the dumplings, a sumptuous dinner prepared by the head chef was brought out, platefuls of meat and fish covering the entire table. Menpo Hall grew even livelier. From the seat of honor, Xue Zhenyang and Madame Wang directed the little snowmen to deliver red packets to every table. A little snowman bumped insistently against Chu Wanning's knee, the stones it has for eyes rolling around as it stared at him. Chu Wanning blinked. Even I get one. He accepted the red packet and opened it to find a handful of pricey golden leaves. A little lost for words, he looked up at Xue Zhenyang, only to see the carefree man grinning back at himself before raising the cup of wine in his hand toward him in a toast. How silly. But then again, Xue Zhenyang was really. Chu Wanning stared at him for a while, and couldn't help the faint smile that curved the corners of his lips. He raised his own cup in return toward the sect leader, and downed it in one gulp. Chu Wanning divided the golden leaves amongst his disciples. 3 rounds of drinks later, accompanied by non-stop performances on the stage, the atmosphere at the table finally grew lively as well. Mostly due to the fact that it seems the 3 brats have grown less afraid of him. As for Chu Wanning, he's always been able to hold his alcohol. Shizun, let me read your palm. Shwemeng was the first to get all tipsy. He grabbed Chu Wanning's hand and held it in front of his eyes to carefully examine. If not for the 3 cups of wine in his system, he never would have dared to be this bold. Your lifeline is long but disjointed, which means your health isn't too good. Shwemeng mumbled, you get sick easily. Mo Ran laughed, that's pretty accurate. Chu Wanning shot him a glare. A long and slender ring finger, Shizun has good fortune with money. 3 lines from a common point, the love line branches off at its tip to merge down into the wisdom line, typically indicates a willingness to sacrifice for love. Shwemeng stared at it blankly for a while before whipping his head up to ask, is that true? Face ashen, Chu Wanning hissed between gritted teeth, Shweziming, are you tired of being alive? But Shwemeng, too drunk to detect the mortal danger he was in, just grinned sincerely and kept right on looking, muttering, ah, and the love line forms an island shape, right beneath the ring finger at that. Shizun, your taste in people is dreadful, absolutely abysmal. Chu Wanning had had enough. He ripped his hand away and brushed his sleeve down to leave. Mo Ran was about to die of laughter, doubled over holding his stomach and cackling loudly, when he suddenly caught Chu Wanning's icy, murderous gaze and forcibly swallowed his laughter, his ribs aching with the effort. Chu Wanning said angrily, what are you laughing about? What's so funny? He was just about to storm off in a rage when Shwemeng grabbed his sleeve. Immediately after, all the laughter disappeared from Mo Ran's face as Shwemeng pulled Chu Wanning down in a drunken daze and burrowed into his arms, with his forehead pressed against the folds of his Shizun's robes and his arms wrapped around his waist, nuzzling affectionately. Shizun, came the young man's soft, velvety voice, complete with a tinge of acting cute, don't go come, have another round. Chu Wanning looked like he was going to choke. Shweziming. What do you think you're doing, let go. But right at this moment, the little snowmen from the stage suddenly all clacked over. It turns out that Tanlang Elder's sword dance performance was over, and it was now Chu Wanning's turn to put on a show. Unfortunately, this also meant that all the eyes in the hall turned collectively toward Chu Wanning just in time to see a drunken Shuemeng clinging to Yuheng Elder's waist and burrowing into the other's arms like a spoiled child. The other disciples were absolutely flabbergasted, with someone even holding their chopsticks upside down, all eyes staring unblinkingly at their corner. Chu Wanning. The scene was extremely awkward for a moment. Yuheng Elder could neither stand nor sit, locked stiffly in place by the way Shuemeng was clinging on him. A long while passed in silence before two dry, forced chuckles came from Mo Ran's direction. "Come on, Shuemeng, still acting so spoiled at your age." He reached out and tried to drag him off now, "Don't cling to Shizun like that." Shuemeng wasn't acting spoiled on purpose. In fact, if he still remembers this when the alcohol wears off, he'd probably slap himself silly. But he was drunken beyond all sense right now, and Mo Ran had to pry and pull for quite a while before he finally managed to rip him off of Chu Wanning. "Sit. What number is this?" Brows knitted, Shuemeng squinted at the single finger Mo Ran held out. 3. Mo Ran. Shi Mei laughed and couldn't resist teasing him. "Who am I?" "You're Shi Mei, duh." Shuemeng rolled his eyes impatiently. Mo Ran joined in, "Then who am I?" Shuemeng glared at him for a while, then said, "A dog." Mo Ran roared, "Shueziming, I will make you eat those words." Suddenly, from the adjacent table, a Shi Sheng Peak disciple who knows if he's just naturally courageous or if alcohol took away all his inhibitions too pointed at Chu Wanning and gleefully asked in a high-pitched voice, "Hey young master, look over there, who's that?" Shuemeng, an authentic lightweight, couldn't even sit up any longer. He slumped over the table, propped his cheek in one hand, and squinted at Chu Wanning long and hard. "Chu Wanning. Shuemeng. Chu Wanning. Shuemeng." The deadlock lasted for a long while, but just when everyone thought that Shuemeng was about to pass out drunk, he suddenly grinned widely and tried to grab Chu Wanning's sleeve again. "Immortal gig." The words were clear and unmistakable. All of the disciples. There was no way to tell who started laughing first, but everyone lost control and joined in. Even if Chu Wanning's face was gloomy and his fuse was short, they figured that if everyone was in on it, then it's not like he could pull out Tianwen and whip every single person here. And so the lively Menpo hall roared with laughter, everyone chiming in over meat and booze. Adding to the chaos. "Haha, immortal gig. Yuheng Elder is so pretty that he does look like an immortal. If you ask me, I'll have to use a common saying. Every time I see him I think of it." Someone asked, "What saying?" "Aside from the 3 layers of snow on you, who else in this world would be fit to don white robes? You are so uncultured." Chu Wanning's face went through a roulette of colors before he finally decided to fake composure and pretend not to have heard at all. He was used to being revered by everyone from a distance, but this sudden closeness born of the festive atmosphere and the abundance of wine left him at a complete loss. Faced with such a situation, he really didn't know how to react at all, and could only force himself to fake a calmness that he didn't feel. But the bloom of pink on his ears betrayed the frozen over expression on his handsome face. Mo Ran noticed. He pressed his lips together and said nothing, but for some reason, a burst of jealousy surged irritatingly through his chest. It's not that he didn't acknowledge Chu Wanning's good looks, but, like everyone else, he knew well that Chu Wanning's beauty was a sharp kind, like the edge of a blade, and that he was cold as snow and frost when he wasn't smiling, very unapproachable. From his dim and narrow perspective, Chu Wanning was like a plate of savory, aromatic crispy meat, but put into a filthy, broken box, and he was the only one in the entire world who had opened that box and gotten to taste the deliciousness inside. He didn't have to worry about someone else finding out about this delicacy and drooling over it. But tonight, bathed in the warmth of the stove fire and tipsy from the warmed wine, so many pairs of eyes were turned to that box that used to be of no interest to anyone. Moran suddenly felt nervous. He wanted to cover the box and chase away these people salivating after his food like swatting away annoying flies. But then he remembered that, in this life, the crispy meat didn't belong to him. His hands were full with clear, translucent wontons. He had no time to chase away the wolves salivating after the meat. To the surprise of Moran and the others, Chu Wanning actually did come prepared with a New Year's show just like the other elders, a Gukkan performance. The disciples were starry-eyed, and someone whispered, "Who would have thought that Yuhang elder knew how to play the Gukkan? And he's so good at it, too, I nearly forgot to taste the meat." Moran sat there quietly without a word. Xuemeng had fallen asleep a while ago, breaths deep and even from where he was sprawled on the table. Moran took the jar of wine by his hand and filled his own cup, drinking from it as he listened while staring at the person on stage. Lost in thought. The irritation in his chest grew worse. In the last life, Chu Wanning didn't play anything at the New Year's Eve feast. Very few people knew the way he looked when playing the Gukkan. There was a Gukkan made of paulownia wood in the courtyard when he was being kept prisoner by Moran. One day, maybe to vent his frustrations, he had sat by it, closed his eyes, and played a song. The sound of the Gukkan drifted through the air, attracting birds and butterflies alike. When Moran returned, the sight that greeted him was that of Chu Wanning's profile in the courtyard, indescribably lofty and serene. And just how had he treated him back then? Oh, right. He had pushed him down and fucked him next to the Gukkan, violated this man who was clear and cold as the light of the moon right there in the courtyard. Moran cared only about chasing his own pleasure, not even sparing a thought for Chu Wanning's pain and discomfort, even disregarding the fact that it was already winter, and his Shizun, who couldn't handle the cold, was lying there on the ice-cold cobblestone with his robes torn off, getting fucked by him until he really couldn't take it anymore and passed out. Afterwards, he didn't fully recover even after months of careful tending. At that time, Moran had said to him in a chilly tone, "Chu Wanning, from now on, you're forbidden from playing the Gukkan in front of others. Do you have any idea, the way you look when playing is so..." He pressed his lips together, but couldn't find the right words, so he didn't finish the sentence. "It's so what?" It was clearly a serene, dignified look, but for some reason, it was so alluring as to destroy all of his self-control. Chu Wanning said nothing, lips pale and eyes closed, the set of his eyebrows stern. Moran raised a hand and hesitated for a second before touching the tightly knitted space between his brows. Taxian Jun's gestures were almost gentle, but his voice was still cold and ruthless. "If you don't listen, this venerable one will chain you to the bed, and then you won't be able to do anything but sleep with this venerable one. Don't think this venerable one won't do it." And just how had Chu Wanning responded back then? Moran took another sip, watching the person on the stage, and continued his melancholic recollection. He couldn't be sure. Maybe he had said nothing. Or maybe he had opened his eyes and coldly said, "Get the hell out." He couldn't remember clearly anymore. In that life, he had been entangled with Chu Wanning for so long that many things had become blurred at the edges. Eventually, like a beast, he knew only one thing: Chu Wanning was his. Even if he didn't like him, he was still his to sunder and to ruin. He'd rather rip Chu Wanning apart with his own hands, bite through his ribcage and tear out his organs like a beast, than to allow someone else to touch him. He wanted Chu Wanning's blood to course with his desire, his bones to bear his curse, and his body to be filled with his passion. Wasn't he always so virtuous and untouchable? And in the end, didn't he still have to open his legs for the world's evilest villain, on the bed of the most ruthless tyrant, to have his life be taken by the man's fiery weapon? He defiled him, made him dirty, inside, outside, everywhere. Shredded clothes weren't so easy to put back on. Moran closed his eyes, knuckles white, Heart hammering. Sunken deep into his memories, he could no longer hear the lively merriment of New Year's Eve festivities, or the soothing sounds of Chu Wanning's guqin. All that remained in his mind was a callous, crazed voice, swooping back from the past and hovering like a vulture. Hell is too cold. Chu Wanning, I'll take you to the grave with me. That's right, you're like a god, you're everyone's light, all of them, Shuemeng, Mei Hangxiu, and all the common people are just waiting for you to shine on them. Chu Zongxi, how very saintly of you. The voice laughed sweetly, laughed and laughed, until it suddenly became cruel, like a soul split in half, thundering, but what about me? Have you ever shined on me? Ever given me any warmth? All you've ever given me were these scars on my body. How very saintly of you, Chu Wanning. Your body is mine, and your life too. You want to be their fire, but I'll be taking you to the grave with me, I'll make you shine on my dead body and nothing else. I want you to rot with me. Living or dying won't be up to you. Suddenly, there was a loud cheering and applause. Mo Ran's eyes flew open. His back was drenched in a cold sweat. The performance had ended, and all of the disciples were clapping enthusiastically. Sitting in the crowd, Mo Ran felt his vision pulsing and blurring, fading in and out. He watched Chu Wanning walk slowly down the wooden steps, holding a guqin made of paulownia wood. In that moment, for the very first time in this life, he suddenly felt that it was all so absurd, that his past self must have been mad. Chu Wanning wasn't actually a bad guy. Why was he even doing any of this? He swallowed, feeling the burn of the alcohol down his throat, but feeling no less at a loss, exhausted and confused, until finally, he fell into a drunken oblivion. End chapter.